Week one of fantasy football is in the books. We had all the games and we reacted. I reacted on Twitter. You reacted on Twitter. Everybody reacted on Twitter to fantasy football in week one. So today, this is a new segment. This is a new thing that we're doing this year. Basically, in today's live stream, we're going to be going through our fantasy football reactions, 8 to 10 takeaways from the week's fantasy football games. Then we're going to break down some of your guys' dynasty trades. And if you want your trades featured on the show, of course, we're going to be asking for those every Sunday night around the time Sunday Night Football is going on, just to give an idea of like how the dynasty trade market is reacting in season, to make sure that we're covering our dynasty crowd as well. And then at the end of this video, for about 15-20 minutes, we'll be talking about waiver wire ads. I see we have a super chat already. We will get to that later in the video. So once we talk about the waiver stuff, I believe it's a waiver question as well. We'll try and answer some of your guys' questions towards the end of the video when we're talking waiver stuff. But I had a lot of fun watching the games. I had some not so much fun watching the games. I don't know. What was your reaction to the first week?
Had a ton of fun watching these games. And for the record, I mean, both of our teams end up leaving the week 1-0. So very nice. In terms of, things that we might not have wanted to see is our beloved Atlanta Falcons in week one. And I know we got some comments on the live stream. We got some comments already in this live stream particularly, but Arthur Smith kind of doing a little bit of Arthur Smith's in week one. I'm not going to lie. We did see Desmond Ridder, 18 pass attempts, not really show the efficiency we quite expected going into the season. I for one, thought there's no way he can be as bad or worse than Marcus Mariota, and he just chose to prove me wrong in that regard. He looked awful, yards per attempt wise. The passing attack was never looking efficient. The running backs were basically the central point of that passing attack in week one. For what it's worth, I do think that come the season, once he feels more comfortable, maybe we could see the shift in dynamic. But for starters right now, any pass catching weapon on the Atlanta Falcons, I do think you have to downgrade in terms of what you can expect.
Yeah, and I mean, we could start right off the top with Drake London. He runs 20 of the 22 routes. He gets one target. Kyle Pitts, he runs, pretty much all the routes as well, 20 of the 22 routes, even though some people I saw concerned about his overall snap share. I don't really give a shit if he's on the field blocking as long as he's running routes when they're running routes. But even still, he only had 3 targets, even though he had that big play down the field. So yeah, I mean, hopefully, again, this is a week one sample size. So we got to remember it's 1 week. All of these takeaways, all of the stuff that we're going to talk about in this video, it is a 1 week sample size, but this also goes exactly to what the Atlanta Falcons did last year, which is like they're going to drop back like 20 to 25 times a game. It's going to be very difficult for Kyle Pitts and Drake London to get out to a hot start. So I would say, generally speaking, I don't expect them to drop back this little, but at the same time, it's their DNA. They want to run the ball. They want to get, Algier involved. They want to get Bijan Robinson involved. We can transition right into talking about the backfield because I'm sure a lot of people are going to be concerned or excited, or I don't know what the reaction is. But for me, I was quite encouraged with Bijan Robinson's usage, to be honest, because I understand it sucked having Tyler Algier like vulture 2 goal line carries and have a monster game in and of its own right if you have Bijan Robinson, and I obviously do in a lot of places. I drafted him our listener league. I drafted him 20% of the time in Underdog Fantasy's Best Ball Mania contest. So I have a lot of stake in Bijan Robinson, believe me. But for a rookie in his first game, to have 18 of the 22 routes, like an 80% route participation for a running back, is absolutely insane. He obviously looks the part. He looks like he's the best running back on the team and potentially one of the best in the league already after one game. 6 targets is encouraging to see. Only had 10 carries and Algier had 15. So again, a little discouraging there, but for the most part, with Algier and the Bijan Robinson, dynamic, I expect it to continue to lean in Bijan's favor as the season goes along. And overall, I'm not all that concerned about what I saw this week.
I'm not concerned whatsoever. I mean, he looked incredible on the touches he had. 16 overall touches, 16 opportunities, 6 of them coming through the air, including that one play on the goal line. He comes in motion, catches that in the flat, fucking absolutely makes that defender look absolutely silly, breaks his ankles, breaks a couple more tackles, obviously scores that touchdown. All this tells me is the fact that Algier's getting the work he is right now, and Bijan had over 20 PPR points. Could you just imagine Bijan come week 4, come week 5, when that like rookie stigma's kind of stenched away and Arthur Smith's just playing his best running back? This makes me even more confident on my take that I do think he can have a legendary 25 plus PPR point per game ceiling, because if he was able to do this in a split backfield with 16 opportunities, looking literally as efficient as guys like Travis Etienne, guys like Tony Pollard across the league, if he carries that level of efficiency, now you're bumping that up to 20, 21, 22, 23 opportunities on a team that wants to run the ball. I do think that going forward, he's a clear-cut top 3 overall player for me. And I do think that with him, with McCaffrey, I think they're the clear-cut running backs. But I mean, speaking of Austin Eckler too, I think we can just transition straight to this next point, this next takeaway, that the Dolphins Chargers fantasy game was an absolute goldmine. If you had players in this game, you're more than likely in a very, very good spot towards getting that 1-0 record. Tua Tagovailoa, the quarterback, won on the week with 28.1 points. Austin Eckler, RB2 on the week with 26.4. Tyreek Hill, the big standout of the week, 44.5 PPR points. Had to play him in one of my leagues, so big pain there. Raheem Mostert, solid RB2, RB16 with 13.3. Waddle, 11.8. And then Keenan Allen had 14.2 PPR points. The only one that you could have started really in this matchup and been disappointed about was the fact that, Mike Williams got hurt, didn't have a really good fantasy game, but everywhere else on the field was a fantasy goldmine and ended up being one of the best games of the entire weekend with Miami and Los Angeles.
Yeah, you didn't even mention the quarterback. Justin Herbert punches in a touchdown on the ground. Of course, I have Mike Williams in my home league. That was the only player from this game that didn't have a good game. But we did kind of talk about that, right? We're like, he's going to get shadow coverage from Xavier Howard. And I think people, sometimes when we talk about shadow coverage, people are like, good receivers beat their shadow coverage. It's not necessarily that they're about like, they're going to get locked down, which definitely can happen. But the reason I think shadow coverage matters is it affects the offensive play calling more than anything. Because, for example, tonight we're going to see this, both of the top receivers, Garrett Wilson and Stephon Diggs, expected to see shadow coverage from Sauce Gardner and Tre'Davious White, respectively. It could affect the way that the Bills and Jets call the game. They're going to, lean towards not making, testing Sauce Gardner being the primary read on a play, because they know Sauce Gardner is one of the best corners in the league. So when it comes to shadow coverage, I do want to say, good receivers can beat good corners. That's absolutely possible, especially in this day and age. It's favored towards the receiver producing, but I will say it does affect play calling. And I think that's what happened in this Chargers game, where Mike Williams was not really, they didn't really test Xavier Howard down the field. Justin Herbert kind of leaned towards the more dink and dunk stuff with Austin Eckler. They ran the ball well with Josh Kelly as well. And then Keenan Allen was the major target earner of the wide receivers.
Yeah, we're going to talk more about this Chargers offense as the stream goes along, especially towards the end. But I could tell right off the bat watching that Chargers offense that Kellen Moore had a big stamp on it. I just want to quickly add this to the point, to the takeaway, that Kellen Moore, you saw a lot more efficiency on the ground. You saw a lot more success. I mean, I want to say 65 or 70% of the recorded rushes were deemed as an efficient rush according to PFF. So that basically just means that they're being able to run the ball at will. Obviously, Miami on the other side, their passing attack looked phenomenal. Tua Tagovailoa looking like he's a clear top 12, top 10 level quarterback at this point. If he can keep up this level of play, I do think he can enter that dark horse in terms of MVP conversations, especially with the speed they have on the outside with Waddle and Hill. So definitely a takeaway there. Love both of these offenses, and I think both of them can be league winners down the stretch.
Yeah, and one last thing on this game, then we can move on, is the Dolphins actually were third, I believe it was, in neutral pass rate, which is something that we really actually didn't see from them very much. Even though Tua was really good last year when he was healthy, they actually generally were more of a run-heavy approach, or at least, on early downs, they were trying to establish the run. Maybe it was because the Chargers got up in this game and they had to come back and that kind of thing. But again, neutral game script pass rate dictates that when the game is close, they pass the ball pretty much as I think Minnesota was one of the only teams ahead of them, which we know Minnesota is a very pass-friendly situation. So that's definitely something that's really encouraging to see. Probably not so much for Tyreek, because we already knew he was going to eat, but I would say definitely for Jalen Waddle. It's encouraging that the Dolphins are going to pass a lot on early downs and make it a point of emphasis to pass a lot. Because I will say Waddle's ceiling is a little bit higher now if the Dolphins are going to be a very pass-friendly offense, because Tyreek Hill can get his. I mean, obviously, he got a lot of the production in this game. He had 45 PPR points. But most weeks, you're going to see a little bit more of a balance, I would say, between the two.
Yeah, and not to mention with either of them, obviously, we know Tyreek Hill is a clear top 5 player, but with Jalen Waddle as well, he may not get the pure volume that Tyreek does. Tyreek Hill, a legit 30-plus target share guy on what could literally be a wide receiver 1 overall ceiling, in my opinion, for him. But Jalen Waddle, like you said, even if he has 6, 7, 8 targets a game, he's got the breakaway ability to take any one of those to the house. So I do think both of them moving forward can pretty much be viewed as consensus top 12 overall wide receivers. I would say Waddle's around that range.
Yeah, I mean, he's still probably limited to a low-end wide receiver 1 type of ceiling, like we kind of talked about all offseason. But the increased pass volume is definitely something that I'm encouraged to see with the Dolphins. That was easily the best game of the week. A lot of these games were kind of snoozers regardless. Other than that game, that was the only one that was back and forth, high scoring, a lot of fantasy production in that one. So RIP to you guys if you played against Tyreek Hill or if you played against Austin Eckler, you played against some of these guys, because I'm sure you're probably in a hole right now. The other major takeaway that we really have to talk about off the top, there was a lot of injuries this week, and only one that was like really serious by the sounds of it. But we can start right off the top. J.K. Dobbins, ironically, was on the thumbnail of our trade for these guys before the season starts video, and hopefully you guys didn't, because he tore his Achilles. And brutal for J.K. Dobbins, coming off of literally like ACL, MCL, PCL, meniscus, LCL. He tore every ligament in his knee just 2 years ago. And not only was he on his way to a monster game in this one, he came out and had like 23 of the 29 snaps. He was going to be a workhorse. He probably would have been outstanding this season had he been able to stay healthy. But he tears his Achilles. He's going to have a long road to recovery, of course. Cam Akers has really never been the same so far since we've seen him tear his Achilles. James Robinson has bounced around the league since tearing his Achilles. It's brutal for J.K. Dobbins, man.
Can we just have nice things for once when we have young, upside, talented, efficient backs? Like, it's actually insane that it's happened to him multiple times at this point, with obviously the knee injury and now the torn Achilles basically affecting the end of his career. Like, honest to God, like there could be a scenario where next year he doesn't look like the same. He was a player that was always going to thrive on the efficiency of his rushing attack. Well, now he's got a fucked up knee. Now he's got a fucked up Achilles. Like, how are you going to have that same level of juice, same level of explosiveness, even when you come back? We saw it affect the way it has with Cam Akers, Deontay Foreman in the past. And with J.K. Dobbins, man, like I think there's a real possibility that because he's not on that deal, Ravens have no loyalty towards bringing him back according to next year and years on, that they either draft the guy, maybe trade for JT at the deadline this year. We'll see what happens. But J.K. Dobbins, it's hard to project long term, I would say. You're frozen.
An extremely talented player with, Jonathan Taylor and Swift and all those type of guys, and just a brutal situation for his career. And hopefully he can make a comeback, but he's got an uphill climb for sure. So,
yep.
The other injuries, we did see a lot of other ones. A lot of them were more like ticky-tack stuff. Aaron Jones, pulled his hamstring on that long touchdown reception. Deontay Johnson pulled his hamstring and left the game as a result of that. We saw a couple concussions here and there. I think Mike Williams and Tyler Lockett cleared the concussion protocol, and that's why they were able to come back for their game. So it looks like they should be fine.
Yeah.
Deontay Johnson and Aaron Jones are going to be ones that we're going to need to monitor for sure. Aaron Jones said he could have gone back into the game. For what it's worth, he's like, oh, it was a blowout. We just, whatever the case is, AJ Dillon needs to be rostered. He's probably rostered in your league, but obviously he definitely needs to be. Okay. And then we did see some more other ones too. I think Pat Freiermuth had a chest injury. Greg Dulcich had like a leg injury that caused him to miss the rest of the game. Is there any I'm missing off the top of my head?
Well, I just wanted to say, for what it's worth, with Aaron Jones, when he was getting his hamstring rolled on, like he was getting it worked on, trying to like loosen it up, he was like thumbsing up the camera and making like weird faces in the camera. And I'm just, obviously it could be a narrative here. He could actually be hurt, but I'm thinking, like, if you're a player, like you're going to know your body, you're going to know whether you're going to come back or not, especially given the wear and tear he's seen in the past, the age he's at the running back position. He knows his body by now, to the point where I doubt he would be making, faces, thumbs up and shit if he was actually like seriously hurt. So that is at least one positive working. Now, for what it's worth, it is still a 28 going on 29-year-old running back.
He's already 29. He's almost 30, dude. 29 he's an old running back. So, hamstring pull, if he thinks he's fine, that's sure. But we've seen, fantasy players and NFL players overrate their own health. And if he tries to get back at it too quick, if he tries to log a full practice, we can see these things get re-aggravated. Of course, that's what we're dealing with Cooper Kupp. And, Keenan Allen obviously was a big victim of that last season, where he tried to come back too fast and then it ended up, re-aggravating that injury. So Aaron Jones, I would say, like, if the Packers are any bit unsure about him during the week, I would hope that they do the smart thing and let AJ Dillon carry the rock for a week.
Real quick, but by the way, funny that he was supposed to be, my safe play of the week. I'm like, yeah, he's got, a solid RB2 baseline. He'll be good for your lineups. Just goes out there and has nearly 30 PPR points. So shout out Aaron Jones. Did end up being a safe play at the end of the day.
Yeah, my safe play of the week was Keenan Allen, who was a wide receiver 2 or better, which is all the qualification that we needed for a safe play. So my guy fit more the description of what we were going for. Your guys just had like a monster high ceiling game, which honestly we should have expected a little bit. Like the Packers, were like 1-point dogs. I think they were at home against the Bears. The Packers historically have done very well against the Bears. We know the Bears defense is not good towards the end. You
The
take away
offense may
when
not be
Roquan
either.
Smith was traded away last year, the Bears were probably the worst defense in the league, and they didn't really add anybody to this defense. They took an offensive lineman in the first round. They traded for DJ Moore. They upgraded the offense, but not really the defense. So I think going forward, I feel comfortable saying that if you guys have fantasy players going up against the Bears defense, probably going to be a good day in store for you. And it's making me a little hesitant on the whole, like, oh, go pick up Jordan Love and waivers right now. I think, the Bears defense is pretty soft. So I will want to see what he does against a real defense.
Yep. No. Speaking of, we can just transition. We talked a little bit about the Atlanta backfield and how it worked out between Algier and with Tyler Algier and with Bijan Robinson. Sorry. I may as well just put rookie first round running backs workloads, because I do think that both him and Jahmyr Gibbs, the first round rookie running backs from this year, obviously we saw the talent, we saw the efficiency on display. We had, an older veteran running back in the backfield, kind of limiting the total snaps. I'm just curious to get your thoughts. Like, what do you think this kind of means for both of them? And for me personally, I'm buying each of them.
Yeah, we could all group all of the rookie running backs together because, we saw Kendre Miller out with an injury. Devon Achane should have been healthy enough to play and then was made healthy inactive by the looks of it, which maybe it's just because he's behind the 8 ball because he was already, probably like a second or a third stringer in the preseason. Then he gets the injury or whatever. We're seeing these rookie running back to the first round guys with Gibbs and with Bijan. Zach Charbonnet played like 10 snaps and he was a second round pick for the Seahawks. So keep in mind that like these rookies, this is generally what's supposed to happen. Like week 3, week 4, week 5, if it's still happening, then we should be a little bit concerned, but it's week 1. Like the veterans are usually going to get leniency and favorability from the coaching staffs early on in the year. So I wouldn't panic on Gibbs. I wouldn't panic on Bijan Robinson. If anything, if people are panicking, I would be going and buying both players. I'm willing to buy high on Bijan, even though he had a great fantasy performance. I still think there's plenty of meat left on the bone. And same goes for Gibbs. Even though he looked really good, I still think there's plenty of meat left on the bone there.
Yeah, 100%. If you can get them for their current like preseason cost, like what you're getting in your fantasy drafts, like again, in a lot of leagues, like Bijan was going in the mid to late first round. If you can get him right now for, let's just say, a wide receiver that went off that did really good, like a Monter St. Brown plus a small piece, if you can get Bijan for that, go out and get him. If you can get Jahmyr Gibbs, he was going around the 3-4 turn. If you can get him for like Deebo
Aaron Jones,
Samuel,
the perfect one, because he
Aaron
just had a
Jones
monster
plus.
game. That's exactly around the range we're talking about there
100%.
too. Ramondre Stevenson had a pretty decent performance. Maybe you could do Ramondre for Gibbs plus a piece or something like that. Definitely be, testing the waters on those rookies, because some, newer fantasy players are just, they drafted Gibbs because they saw a hype train or they watched their Alabama highlights or something. And they don't understand that like coaches don't like rookies. That's just a known fact. And they're not going to throw a rookie out there unless they 100% believe that they're ready. And that includes high draft picks like Gibbs and Bijan, because they had the draft capital that would kind of lean you towards they should probably be workhorses right away. But that doesn't always happen. It probably will happen sooner rather than later for those guys, like by week 4 or something like that. But it's not a guarantee.
And real quick, that is the key here, because people are worried, like, is this going to be the full season? Am I going to have to be worried about, David Montgomery getting 20 plus touches per game through the rest of the season? Like, what's going to go on here? Not every week is Jahmyr Gibbs going to put up 60 total yards from scrimmage on 9 touches and not get more than 9 touches. I'll just tell you that for free right now. He's not going to be around the 20-25% snap rate. If he continues playing like this, he's going to be at least a 45-50% snap rate guy with more third down work. They already kind of said over on the Thursday night game afterwards that, we wanted to get Jahmyr more involved, but we wanted him to, feel involved first, get the speed of the game down. We didn't want to like overrush him. I do think come week 2, come week 3, possibly week 4, if we're at the worst case scenario, we do see that Jahmyr Gibbs at least makes this into a 50-50 timeshare sooner rather than later.
Yeah. I think we can probably move on to the elite quarterbacks, because a couple of them struggled.
Yeah.
Like it's wild that our top 5 fantasy quarterbacks this week, Mac Jones, Jordan Love, and Anthony Richardson, were 3 of them. So we're talking about, Justin Fields, Jalen Hurts, Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson. These guys had stinkers in your lineup. And are you worried about any of them? Are you? And also like their surrounding pieces and their surrounding offenses. I saw somebody say like, should I sell off Chase? Absolutely not. Like the Bengals offense, I'm not worried one bit about them, except for Joe Mixon, because, preseason we didn't like him. Lamar Jackson, I'm not worried about, especially now, with Dobbins out, maybe they look towards, more of a pass heavy approach. We were already kind of expecting that to begin with. Justin Fields, I think, is the only one that you could maybe say you're worried about. But as far as Hurts, Jackson, and Burrow, I'm not worried one bit.
So real quick, Justin Fields, obviously the offense as a whole didn't look too great, to be quite honest. Fields obviously had his struggles as a player as well, but it's still on the road. It's still against Green Bay, who's relatively owned the Bears for the past. Like, If it happens, the next week, the next 2 weeks, the next 3 weeks, so be it. But in terms of Justin Fields, I'm not worried personally. I do think that he's still, the same investment you made, high rushing upside, potential for the breakout. I just don't think it happened in week one. And especially when it comes to Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, and Joe Burrow, like if you're worried about Joe Burrow, do you not just remember literally what happened last year? Like literally what happened last year? The
Yeah, no,
same exact thing happened. And apologies, I saw somebody say Bears are home. Point remains though,
they were.
the Green Bay Packers have been a team that has historically owned the Bears, so I'm not surprised at the outcome. Like it kind of happened the way it, realistically could have.
Yeah, and I'm honestly not all that worried about the Bears surrounding pieces. Mainly DJ Moore. He only had 2 targets, but the thing that I think is really encouraging, and I might bring this up again with the trade targets video because I think DJ Moore is probably going to be mentioned in there.
Absolutely.
They dropped back 49 times Justin Fields in that game. And I know they were behind the 8 ball, but like even last year when the Bears would get down, they would still be like running the ball a lot. So the fact that DJ Moore ran 46 routes and only had 2 targets, to me, I think is more of an anomaly, more of an outlier. I don't think that's going to happen week over week. Darnell Mooney, for whatever reason, just ended up getting the targets. And also, the Packers are a very good pass defense. They're the team that you want to run against. You do not want to pass against the Green Bay Packers. So I think, after week 3, after week 4, we're probably going to see DJ Moore be like, okay, that's more so what we should expect from him. I don't think this is more indicative of what we think DJ Moore can do on a season-long basis. I think he was phased out of the game plan for whatever reason.
Yeah, and in terms of the other ones we mentioned, like Joe Burrow, obviously we've seen this before. I'm not worried. It's the Bengals offense at the end of the day. Come week 3, come week 4, like they're going to be a top 5, top 3 level offense in the league. Lamar Jackson, I mean, I feel like the big context that people are also missing is the fact that literally his number one weapon, his number one tight end with Mark Andrews was out. And we literally saw how it affected the best quarterback in the league with Patrick Mahomes on Thursday night. So maybe we should have baked that a little bit more in the analysis. We should have said, hey, listen, the Texans, new defensive coordinator there, defensive coach there with D'Amico Ryans there, more improved defense, Will Anderson on the outside. Maybe we got to give them some more respect than we saw last year. But at the same time, it's like Mark Andrews was out, man. Come week 2, come week 3, come week 4, I do think Lamar Jackson's going to be able to enter his groove. And pretty consistent when it comes to Jalen Hurts as well. Like he just faced arguably the best defensive mind the league has ever seen with Bill Belichick. The Patriots are a gritty team. They were always going to try to slow the game down. They were going to try to limit, the big plays that we see from Jalen Hurts and the Eagles on a week-to-week basis, and made them struggle, man. It's tough, man. Playing in Lambeau, playing in New England, having to face Bill Belichick is a tough task for anyone. Not to mention the way Christian Gonzalez played as a rookie, first-round pick cornerback, was able to basically stick with A.J. Brown throughout the game. Big credit to them.
Yeah, I think we might be talking those 2 defenses, the Texans and Patriots, might be 2 of the best 5 or 10 pass defenses in the league. Like the Texans, I had Lamar really low in my rank. I had him at like 7 because I'm scared of the Texans, man. Like their pass defense was really good last year, and that was without the new scheme. D'Amico Ryans coming in, who's obviously a defensive guy. You figure that side of the ball is probably going to be the better side of the ball for the Texans this year. And I actually think like just because they're the Texans and Vegas is going to favor whatever team is going up against them most weeks. They're not a pushover on defense. They're a pushover on offense because they have a rookie quarterback and not a lot of talent right now. But their defense is pretty good. And I wouldn't be shocked if it keeps them in a lot of games. I don't think they're, if they're 10-point dogs every single week, I think you should be taking the Texans against the spread most of the time.
Yeah, honestly, we kind of mentioned it going in. Like we thought the offense would be a little bit better, and we thought the Texans could be able to cover. The offense obviously is still a lot of warts. We got to see CJ Stroud get more adapted against pressure, like the Ravens were bringing all game in that game. But I do think if the offense does take a step up, maybe Nico Collins had a very good game. I think 6 catches for 80 yards on 11 targets. If we see more of that coming forward, and CJ Stroud really takes that step up, I think the Texans come next year specifically are going to be one of the most highest raising teams in terms of the league. Like the team that basically catches everybody off guard.
Yeah, I will say quick note on the Texans too. Dameon Pierce did not maintain his preseason role. He was taken off the field on 3rd downs. He was taken off the field in long down and distance. That's really concerning because now he's a 2-down banger for a bad team. Do we really want to invest in Dameon Pierce? If people are still bought into where he was drafted, like the 4th round of your fantasy draft, I might be looking to use Dameon Pierce to get to Jahmyr Gibbs or use Dameon Pierce to get to somebody else in that range because I'm a little concerned about Dameon Pierce's role there.
Yep, 100%. And speaking of the weekend, the number one other takeaway that I would find, and in terms of Dameon Pierce, we may as well just bring away his backfield into this, is that there may be some week 1 trap backfields, and I'll let you take it away with this one.
Yeah, so, I mean, in years past, we've seen, like, Rex Burkhead pop off in week 1. And we're like, what the hell happened to Damian Pierce? He was like supposed to be the workhorse. And then Rex Burkhead's pretty much nowhere to be found the rest of the season. I'm not saying that it's going to be that bad, but I will say, like, the top 24 scoring running backs, we had guys like Kenneth Gainwell, Kyron Williams, Justice Hill, Tyler Algier, Josh Kelly. Like those guys all performed, had really solid roles. And I wouldn't be shocked if, come week 8, we're like, remember when like Justice Hill was like the biggest waiver ad in week 1? Like for me, like we're going to get into the waivers later on in this video specifically, but for me, I think that I would be very picky when it comes to like the running back position on the waiver wire. Whoever's kind of coming the cheapest is the guys that I would go after. I'm not blowing 50% of my fab on these guys. I would probably be willing to put up, 10 to 20% unless you're absolutely desperate, maybe 25, 30% at most. So for me, I would say don't be just like loading all your fab on Kyron Williams or loading all your fab on Kenneth Gainwell or Justice Hill or Tyler Algier if they're available in your leagues. I would say be picky with your acquisitions and make sure that that we're talking about like guys that they weren't expected to be great guys coming into the season. So we shouldn't just suddenly expect them to be league winners. The guy that I think is the best, and we'll talk about it when we get to the waivers, is Kenneth Gainwell because he plays for the Eagles.
For sure. And obviously if Kenneth Gainwell is available, we'll get into that in a little bit, but obviously if he is available, he was treated like the starting running back for the Eagles. He outplayed Swift basically in every single facet of the game, and Rashad Penny was a healthy scratch, man. Like there's no reason not to have Kenneth Gainwell rostered in your league at this point. And if he isn't rostered, he's a guy I'd be willing to spend a lot of my fab budget on, but we're not going to be talking about him in today's waiver specifically because he is, for the most part, owned in 50+% of your leagues. But I think we can move on. We mentioned how, the elite quarterbacks kind of struggled. Let's talk about the fact that we kind of talked a little bit about CJ Stroud, but in specific, rookie quarterbacks did look pretty decent. Anthony Richardson, of course, the quarterback 4 on the week. Really, really strong game against a strong Jaguars defense. Really, really big positive signs if you're an Indianapolis Colts fan or an Anthony Richardson. Maybe you're a dynasty owner of him or you drafted him as your quarterback 2 this year. Maybe you have like a Kirk Cousins beside him. I do think that the strong signals of Anthony Richardson basically show that he can be a contributor and a high-end contributor at quarterback as soon as this year. And same thing with Bryce Young, obviously a little bit less because the receivers around him kind of let him down. There was really no wide receiver speed, but I do think given the circumstances, playing a division rival week 1, he did handle himself quite well.
Yeah, he threw a couple bad picks. Jesse Bates, a veteran safety, kind of baited him a few times, but he looked decisive. He looked like he wasn't scared. He looked like he kind of knew what he was supposed to do. So, and even CJ Stroud, I mean, like CJ Stroud was running for his life at one point, but I was still pretty impressed given the circumstances with what CJ Stroud was able to accomplish. So I would say if you're a dynasty manager and you have any of these rookie quarterbacks, there was positive takeaways for really every single one of them. Richardson, obviously from a raw fantasy point standpoint, performed the best and it wasn't even close. But I will say I was impressed with Bryce Young and CJ Stroud as well. Real quick, we'll kind of rattle off our last couple takeaways and then we'll get right into some of the dynasty trades that you guys submitted to us. And of course, if you're just joining us and you want to get your dynasty trades broken down for about, we're going to go on these for about 10 minutes or so, and then we'll get into the waiver ads. Just shoot us, a response when I tweet it out before Sunday Night Football every Sunday, or when Danny fires it out into our Discord, you can fire them in there. The tight end wasteland was alive and well. Hunter Henry was the tight end 1 on the week, highest scoring tight end. Of course, Andrews and Kelsey were out for this game. George Kittle came picked up and stuff like that. But not great considering Hunter Henry, Hayden Hurst, and Donald Parham were all top 5 tight ends this week. And Darren Waller, Kyle Pitts, Dallas Goedert, those guys combined for like less than 15 PPR points between the 3 of them. So not great with the tight end position. There's actually a couple tight end waivers that we might mention later on that I think are decent options, but hopefully the tight end position kind of bounces back next week.
Yeah, because this past week, let's just be honest, anybody who went, high round tight end, early round tight end in your drafts, you're kind of left holding the bag there. You mentioned Darren Waller specifically, 3 catches for 36 yards, monsoon Sunday Night Football game. Basically, the only reference I'll make of the game is right now. Shout out 40-0 Dallas Cowboys. But man, those offenses look like a train wreck simply because of how wet, how disgusting it was over in MetLife over on Sunday Night Football. And then with Dallas Goedert, it's kind of like we saw this exactly happen with Devontae Smith last year for the Eagles, where, the other 2 are involved, they're eating, and then Devontae Smith got left holding the bag. I think he had like 1 or 2 targets, 0 points, goose egg last season on week 1. We see the exact same thing happen with Dallas Goedert. 1 target, 0 PPR points. If you start him in your lineup, you basically would have been just as successful starting myself or Corey. Like, it's pretty bad.
Yeah, I will say when it comes to these like loaded offenses with all this talent, the Eagles, the 49ers, the Cowboys, the Bengals, like those teams that have a lot of targets, there's going to be weeks that people disappoint you. Like it's just going to
Yeah.
happen, but you just have to keep firing them out there into your lineup. Obviously, for the 49ers, like Brandon Ayuk has the monster game, Deebo Samuel a little bit more of a down game, George Kittle a little bit more of a down game. But there's going to be other weeks where George Kittle goes off or Deebo Samuel goes off and Brandon Ayuk has more of a down game. So we do have to keep that in mind when it comes to these like great offenses with a lot of fantasy relevant guys. You just got to throw them into your lineup and kind of hope for the best. Like you don't know who's going to have the week that week. You can guess with the matchups and that kind of stuff, but for the most part, you don't want them on your bench.
For those watching right now that have been following FSC for a while, what is one of the number one things that we stress all the time? Fantasy is not predictable. Embrace the variance, especially on a week-to-week basis. Like we can project, for a full 17-game season that this guy's going to be the RB11. Yeah, he might have a game where he's the RB64 and gives you 2.3 fantasy points. We can't predict week-to-week viability. We can only predict what are the over-unders, what's the weather situation, what's the spread, like who's favored, who's at home. Like we can predict certain situational things and potentially predict, who should be able to get the touches. But if somebody goes out there, has 23 touches for 65 yards and no touchdown, like I'm sorry, we projected the touch workload. He should have been more efficient on it, but he wasn't.
Yeah, like Deion Jackson had like 20 touches and like 6 targets in this game, but he fumbled the ball twice. Like sometimes that shit just happens. And also, before we get into the Dynasty Trades, I will like to shout out there is 460 of you concurrently in here, and we have like 40 likes on the stream. So let's get that number up. That is absolute rookie shit. We are going to break down 5 Dynasty Trades submitted to us by you guys. So ideally, we want to favor trades that like happened as a reaction to like what happened on Sunday. So we definitely have a couple of those. And we'll kick it off right away with Taylor Gang's trade here. So I think he made this shortly before the games kicked off, but we can talk about it in relation to how this kind of aged. So he said he's tanking. It's a 1 quarterback league. He's not in a situation where he's trying to compete anytime soon. And what he did was he got his own 2nd round pick back. He's heading to like a pivot 1-year punt league because of, injuries and what was supposed to be a house money year. So we talk about house money teams all the time in Dynasty. And it's like, you got to wait and see what happens. If your team overperforms, then you go and buy players. If your team underperforms, he said due to injuries, maybe he had Dobbins or something like that. That definitely makes some sense. But basically he trades away Javonte Williams and Trey Palmer, who actually caught his first touchdown for the Buccaneers this weekend, and gets Michael Pittman, his own 2nd round pick back, and a 3rd round pick. So what are your thoughts on the deal there with you send away Javonte Williams, you get Pittman, a 2nd and a 3rd, and then a throw-in piece like Palmer on the other side there?
I don't mind that at all, especially in a house money situation. You don't expect to be a heavy contender. Like everybody here knows how much we love Javonte Williams, but at the same time, the way Anthony Richardson looked makes me feel like Michael Pittman may be even more viable in redraft this year than he was initially expected to be. I believe he had 8 catches, 97 yards, had a touchdown in that game. I would say from a face level perspective, if you're starting a startup right now, that Javonte and Michael Pittman are probably going to go in a similar type of range. So the way I look at it is if you're viewing them as relatively equal assets, maybe you put the 3 on the Pittman side. You're liquidating Trey Palmer into a 2nd round pick that, given the fact that it's house money, is probably not going to be higher than the 207, 208 in your draft. So I love your side here. Get the young wide receiver. He's already shown with Anthony Richardson, like I said, to be a quality quarterback against a very good Jaguars defense that, you know what? Now you have a 2nd round pick to play with. You want to add another running back then? Maybe, again, a lot of names in this upcoming draft class that look potentially like keepers. I know, like, for example, we didn't even talk about all preseason, but Bucky Irving's looked pretty good. The quarterback class has already looked phenomenal. The tight ends, obviously, we know Brock Bowers, but Taven Sanders as well has looked fucking amazing. Hookem, shout out to Corey taking down the Alabama Crimson Tide this weekend. But this class is looking phenomenal. If you can get a potential mid-2nd round pick in it, I'm absolutely all for it.
Yeah, he said he's 1-year punting too, so it could be an early 2nd round pick after you sell off some more pieces and that kind of thing. So definitely a good move there. We have Bobby Sylvester's burner, which I thought was hilarious that he sent this from his Twitter account. But J.K. Dobbins, of course, tore his Achilles. This trade was made like during the games, so this is a trade that he offloads J.K. Dobbins and he gets Antonio Gibson in return. So J.K. Dobbins loses a lot of value, right? Because now this is his 2nd major injury of his career. As we talked about, it's an uphill battle for any player to come back from that. And more importantly, too, like when you're a running back and a coaching staff's got to entrust in you to carry a workload, how are they going to do that when you've had 2 major injuries, let alone if you aren't the same player, which is very possible coming back from an Achilles tear?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I want the Gibson side here. I am very, very nervous about Dobbins to the point where, at least with Gibson, I understand, the week one role isn't what we wanted. Brian Robinson was basically traded as the team's running back one this past week. However, even if it's just an implied upside where, okay, anything happens to Brian Robinson, now I have the RB1 for what could be a potentially improving offense across the season. Again, maybe our expectations for Washington as a whole were a little bit inflated. Sam Howell didn't look quite as good as we initially had thought going into that game against the Cardinals. But if he does bounce back, Gibson, maybe gets more playing time, doesn't fumble, gets more opportunity to work it into a 45-50% split with Brian Robinson this week. I do think that with Gibson, you're getting some upside, especially if you're a contender for production for the rest of the season that you simply won't be able to get with J.K. Dobbins. And I mean, the downside, of course, of the situation is that if J.K. Dobbins going into next year isn't a Baltimore Raven, now we're looking at the fact that a new team has to take the chance on a guy coming off a torn Achilles, which I do not want to deal with.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, Gibson, they came from the same draft class. So Gibson is also a free agent after this year. So even if he has like a, up and down season or whatever, he could always sign to a new team. We know that I think NFL teams now at this point have learned not to pay running backs. Gibson's the type of guy that strikes me as like signs a 2-year, $10 million deal with a team and works into like an RB2 workload because they didn't sign anybody else. Like the
Devin
Eagles,
Singletary?
for whatever reason, like just sign him 2 years, $10 million, and he's going to be a pretty good option for fantasy. So, this year, as far as I'm concerned, I think Antonio Gibson is going to have his better days ahead of him. He fumbled, that he probably got benched to some degree. Didn't see another carry after that. So he was pretty much limited to only third down work after that. He ran 17 of the 42 routes. I think he missed a little bit of playing time, like I said. Only had one target to Brian Robinson's 2, and then Brian Robinson outcarried him 19-3. So definitely not ideal, but I don't think that this backfield will be that cut and dry every single week. I think it's going to be more of a 50-50 split, and whoever's kind of playing well, like the hot hand approach is probably how it's going to go. And also, too, like, the Commanders were in this game and were winning this game, and it was like a close game. They're not the best team in the world. It's possible that if they get into negative game scripts, then they have Antonio Gibson out there a little bit more in future games. So let's go on to the next trade here. We got from this was coming from Josh. Josh got the Chris Olave side of this. So unfortunately, he made this trade right after Thursday Night Football. So it looks like he sold off Jahmyr Gibbs after the Thursday Night Football, which I would say, number one, big time no. If you have a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs coming off of a game where like nationally televised, everybody watched it, you're going to get less value inherently than you would have gotten after a great game or after week 3 or after week 7 or whatever the case is. I love Chris Olave, don't get me wrong. And I would say one of like, we've taken some victory laps on this one. The one thing that I'm scared is going to bite me in the ass is that I had Chris Olave way lower than consensus, and I was not excited about him this year. And he looked outstanding in week 1. But what are your thoughts on this trade? He gets Olave, he gives away Jahmyr Gibbs in a second rounder.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough because I love Olave. I think he's going to be a stud. I think he could legitimately have a 1,300, 1,400 yard level season. However, I do think that Gibbs, to me right now, is a clear-cut top 3 running back in Dynasty behind Bijan. And if you want to put Breece there, I'm fine with that. But I do think that Breece and Gibbs are the clear 2-3 for me. And at that point, I'm just looking at it from a leverage standpoint. I'm thinking, okay, what can that 2024 second get me for buying power in season? If I need some production, can that get me a DeAndre Hopkins type? Can that get me, maybe you add a little piece to it and get Cooper Kupp? Somebody's extremely worried. He's out for 4 games, and you can buy low. Cooper Kupp you can get for insert wide receiver X here plus a second. I'm just looking forward to what I can do with that second round pick to buy some buying power, because I do think for the most part on the market that Olave and Gibbs are going to be going around the same range for me in terms of dynasty startups, both being, late second, early third round picks in a lot of your startups. So for me, because I view these guys as relatively equal in value, I'm just going to liquidate with the second. But again, if you're competing and you love Chris Olave and you think he could be a top 5 wide receiver this year, I don't hate you for making this move because he looked phenomenal.
Yeah, he looked outstanding. And for what it's worth, too, it is a 10-team league. And he said this move was made before the Dobbins injury. So he has Dobbins on his team, and he had Jonathan Taylor as well. So you're looking at a spot now where you probably can't compete. So selling off running back production in that instance usually makes sense. Okay. And getting yourself a young wide receiver who has more long-term value makes sense. But I will say, like, at face value, if you're going to, downgrade within a similar tier, which is how I view Olave and Gibbs from a dynasty perspective, I'll take whatever side has the second round pick on it usually.
Now, I'm doubting that you'd be able to do this right now. I think Olave is honestly like the cut line for like moving a Gibbs in a second, because like you're not getting Wilson for this. You're not getting AJ Brown for this. You're not getting
I would do it for London in a second as well. I'm comfortable with it.
Okay. No, I'm basically just saying like Olave would be the next wide receiver that you could probably get for Gibbs in a second, because I doubt the Wilson owner would give you Wilson, doubt the CD owner
Right.
would give you CD, doubt the AJ would give you AJ. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
makes some sense. Waddle might
good
be
move
in
though.
that area as well. So let's move
Fair
on. We
move.
got two more trades here, and then we'll get into the actual waiver targets of this stream here. We got a Cadence trade. We can go through this one pretty quickly. I think this is
Wow.
just a great process move. I mean, you sell
Yeah.
Garrett Wilson, who obviously is a superstar and could have a monster breakout season this year, could be untouchable on the dynasty market by the end of the NFL season. But anytime I can upgrade to a guy who's already scored a 39-yard touchdown against my Buccaneers, already looked good, even on like, I think he played like 68% of the snaps. He wasn't even fully a starting receiver yet. And I expect that to change because KJ Osborne looked like shit. Jordan Addison and 2 1s and a second for Garrett Wilson is just honestly a great process move. Like, what do you think is a great, like, I think at face value, it's a good move and it's a good process move. What do you think is equivalent value with a Jordan Addison, Garrett Wilson trade? Like, what would you need on top of Addison?
Honestly, like if I was selling Garrett Wilson, I'd probably be comfortable just with Addison and the 2 1s. But if I'm trying to buy Garrett Wilson, I don't know if I'm throwing 2 1s on top of Addison. Like, I love Garrett Wilson, and you could sub really any wide receiver in there. CeeDee Lamb, AJ Brown, Garrett Wilson in that tier. Obviously, once you get to Jefferson and Chase, you're flipping to the Jefferson Chase side. But I do think at this cost point, you're basically getting what equivalent value there of 3.5 1s, maybe if you count Addison as a mid to late projected one, which I do think he's got the upside to be even higher than that. I'm liquidating every single chance I get here.
Yeah. I think I think you described it perfectly there. If I was selling Wilson, I would want Addison and 2 1s. If I was buying Wilson, I would probably be Addison and a first and a second. That's probably what I would want to pay for Wilson if I was going after him. So I think overall, good process move. You down tier, you get a young wide receiver that you think is a breakout candidate, and it's like an insulated trade, right? Even if Addison doesn't necessarily become a top 10 dynasty wide receiver, maybe he's like stuck in the Brandon Ayuk, Marquise Brown range for the rest of his career. You still have 2 1s of value to potentially hit big on a player and a second of value to hit big on a player that could eventually become as valuable as Garrett Wilson.
Well, real quick, even if Garrett Wilson, or not Garrett Wilson, even if one of those first don't end up top 3, don't end up top 4, which is still a range of outcome, like it could still be in range for Caleb Williams, for Marvin Harrison, for Drake May, for someone like that, a really, really good needle mover. But even if it's just, let's say 106 and 108, those first end up being. Well, guess what? With how the quarterback class is looking, we may have 5 or 6 quarterbacks going in round 1 this year. I mean, you broke it down. I believe you tweeted out today the fact that the top young draft eligible quarterbacks this year, like JJ McCarthy's look good, Shedeur Sanders, Drake May, Jackson Dart, your boy KJ Jefferson, like all of them are just playing out of their fucking minds right now. If the NFL views these guys as legitimate difference makers, which they've shown at the collegiate level thus far, 5 or 6 guys, like I said, could be going in the first round. I genuinely think that this is the best quarterback class we have seen probably since 2020.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to see how it materializes throughout the season, but all these guys have tools too. Like, I mean, KJ Jefferson, if he gets first round draft capital, he can run. Jackson Dart's got a big arm. He can run. He's got the like Justin Herbert, Josh Allen build. JJ McCarthy's got some good athleticism on his side as well. Shedeur Sanders, obviously son of one of the fastest players in NFL history. I'm probably pretty confident that he could run if he needed to. So we're in a pretty decent spot there for 2024 quarterbacks, which is something that I was absolutely worried about going into the season. I thought it was just going to be Caleb and Drake May, but it looks like we're getting some performance out of these QBs. So last dynasty trade, and then we'll get into the actual waiver ads of this video. We have a trade here from Will Sask. He gets Danny's boy. It looks like he's a Giants fan too. So he's trading for a Cowboys player and CeeDee Lamb. Trades away Allen Robinson, who ain't worth shit. Zay Flowers, a first round pick, a second round pick, and another second round pick. It doesn't look like any of these picks are from the same team, and none of them are his picks also. So we have no idea it looks like he's probably a contender making this move, and he's selling away picks that are not his own. So I'm not exactly sure where these picks end up being. Maybe he actually told you in the message here, which is I'm assuming what you're looking for. Yep. But at face value, let me just talk about this trade. So CeeDee Lamb on top of Zay Flowers, what would I want for CeeDee Lamb if I was buying him? Ideally, I would like to get CeeDee Lamb for Zay Flowers and 2 1s, maybe even Zay Flowers a first and 2 seconds. So I think at face value, it's a pretty fair trade overall for both sides. I think Zay Flowers is an exciting young receiver. CeeDee Lamb is obviously very established and has high upside.
Yeah, quick note. So for what it's worth, he did say in the Discord, he sent this at 8:43 p.m. last night. He said that all these picks should be late. With that context at hand here, give me CeeDee Lamb all day, every day. Like Zay Flowers, I still really think that he could be a very, very good damn wide receiver. Still prefer Jordan Addison, like who we mentioned in the last trade, but like Zay Flowers is a guy that I'm ready to already accept, quote unquote defeat on. Like I wasn't low on him in particular. I still, viewed him relatively where consensus was. Did have a preference, did have a lean for Rashad Bateman, but those answers are already, or those questions are already answered come week one. Like Zay Flowers worked ahead of Rashad Bateman, was treated as the number one wide receiver in that team, had a 45% target share, over 3.4 yards per team pass attempt in week one as a fucking rookie. I think he's going to be a great player. The problem is that I think CeeDee Lamb could be an absolute superstar. I think 1,500 yards, 10 plus, 12 plus touchdowns is in the range of outcomes. And I just think from a buying power standpoint, what CeeDee Lamb is going to be able to provide you from a market value perspective come week 7, week 8, or even after the season going forward is going to be higher than what Zay Flowers is. And you're not getting the benefit of one of those picks being the 103, the 104 in your draft. All those picks projected to be late.
Yeah, and as somebody who is higher on Flowers than you and lower on CeeDee Lamb because I'm not a Cowboys fan, I still like the CeeDee Lamb side of that deal.
Yep.
So no bias going into that one for Danny. So we are going to get into the waiver ads. So as I talked about on our Sunday live stream, neither of us like doing waiver videos. So as much as maybe you guys like us doing the waiver video every Tuesday morning, we don't like it. So what we're doing instead is we're going to break down our top 5 waiver ads. We're going to go from 5 to 1. We're going to talk about any honorable mentions, any onesie positions, quarterbacks and tight ends, and guys that we think absolutely should be rostered already, but definitely check your waiver wire just to be sure. And we don't know who the other person picked. So we're going to get some differing opinions here. We're going to get some back and forth. So this should be really fun. And then anybody who super chats, a waiver question or whatever, maybe we'll get into some at the end of the stream. We want to keep this to about an hour if we can. So people watch it back, but definitely this should be an interesting discussion. So let's start it off with the guys that absolutely should be rostered, but they're worth mentioning anyway. Because of the Aaron Jones hamstring injury, make sure AJ Dillon is rostered in your league because he could come into play as soon as this week. Kenneth Gainwell, we kind of already talked about. We can go over it again briefly here. The Eagles running back usage, he was the number one guy in Philadelphia this week. He played most of the third downs, most of the early downs, which I think is a big time surprise. And then out of all the plays, we're talking, 39 of the 56 overall snaps for Kenneth Gainwell, and he got a lot of the opportunities as well. So if he's available, he's currently rostered in 61% of the leagues. And on Sunday, I told you to go pick him up before the game started because he's going to be very expensive now if he's available on your waiver wire. So I'm glad I did that personally, and I'm glad I told you guys to do that.
I wish he was available in any one of my leagues to be able to do that, but sadly he wasn't. I just guess propping some of these guys up all preseason is going to be able to do that to your waiver wire. It's just going to look bleak because everybody has all the high upside players that you're going to want to target, but it is what it is. And speaking of one of those players, Jaylen Warren did basically see almost a 50-50 full committee with Najee. Now, for what it's worth, they play the Niners. They were down early. They were in a very, very pass-heavy game script to the point where neither of them really got a full touch workload, but if this is indicative of anything moving forward, is that the Steelers kind of realize like the sunk cost fallacy with Najee Harris is over. If Najee Harris is not as good of a running back as Jaylen Warren, I don't care who was been drafted and I don't care who was a first round pick. We will play the player that can help us more on offense. And that might just be Jaylen Warren, man. Like Najee Harris at this point of his career, sucks to admit this because I love them coming out of the draft, but he's objectively a bad running back.
Yeah, he's got his uses. He's a good receiver. He's, okay between the tackles. But I think part of the reason the Steelers offense stalled out so hard against the 49ers is that Najee Harris is not really going to provide you anything more than a replacement level running back when he gets the ball. And Jaylen Warren in his limited, usage has been better than that. And he's been a guy that can break off big plays. And of course, two other guys that I have listed here that should be rostered, but definitely check your waiver wire. Zay Flowers, who we talked about, touched the ball 11 times and had a monster game. He's rostered in 71% of leagues. So he's probably not available, but if you guys are in shallower leagues, even 8-team leagues or whatever, definitely pick him up and go after him on the waiver. I think I'd be willing to spend like 30 to 50% of my fab on Zay Flowers because he could have a monster breakout season and be this year's Garrett Wilson or something like that with the way that he played for the Baltimore Ravens. And then obviously Tyler Algier as well, 52% rostered for the Atlanta Falcons. He had a monster game. I don't expect him to be that good from a raw fantasy production standpoint every week, but he has a standalone role and an inherent upside if Bijan gets hurt.
Yeah, 100%. Tyler Algier is easily one of the best backup running backs in the entire NFL. And right now, at the very least, in the next couple of weeks, I feel like you can expect some standalone value. So, one of the guys I was absolutely hammering in Best Ball Mania, even just as a handcuff running back, but the fact that he has this standalone viability is very, very encouraging. Stumble some of my words, but we got there at the end of the day. My number 5 waiver, I'll quickly just get into it right now, is going to be Rashid Shaheed, wide receiver of the New Orleans Saints. Bush already knew this was coming. We talked about it off camera, but we do see a monster day from Shaheed, despite 16 points total from that Saints offense. Runs 25 of the 38 team routes. Clearly the wide receiver 3, 11 personnel wide receiver for this team. And we did see, despite sharing the field with Olave, who had 10 targets, despite sharing the field with Michael Thomas, who had 7 targets, he commanded 6 targets, produced, again, 89 yards and a touchdown on those targets with 2 carries for 11 yards. So this is a guy that I do think that the Saints want to make a concerted effort in getting the ball in his hands on a week-to-week basis. And obviously the implied upside here is that Michael Thomas, older player, hasn't finished the season in the last 2 years. If he misses any time and Shaheed has the opportunity to work as this team's wide receiver too, I think he's got wide receiver 30 plus upside written all over him.
Yeah, I didn't. Shaheed did not make my list, so he would have just been outside of this. But I do think, especially in leagues where you like have deeper starting lineups, so you got to throw in like a lot of flexes and that kind of thing. I think he's definitely a good option. I just prefer some of the guys that I have ahead of him. And my number 5 guy is a very good example of that, because my number 5 guy is Zay Jones of the Jacksonville Jaguars,
between them
currently rostered in 30% of leagues right now. It's week 1, but honestly, it looks like Zay Jones might end up being a huge value in drafts, because Christian Kirk was reduced to a slot receiver in the preseason. He was reduced to a slot receiver in this game. And I will say that I don't think Christian Kirk is going to be this bad on any given week. Like, we saw him only command 2 targets and pretty much be useless and only run 24 routes to Zay Jones' 32 and Calvin Ridley's 34. Obviously, Calvin Ridley showed why he's the number 1 wide receiver on this team. But Zay Jones had an awesome touchdown catch, one-hander, one of the best plays of the entire slate. And also, he's going to be on the field more with Trevor Lawrence. And he's a guy that can, run downfield routes and give you big plays. So especially for those of you guys that are in deeper leagues where you got to start 3 wide receivers and 2 flexes, Zay Jones absolutely needs to be rostered. And should be a guy, honestly, like in good matchups, I'm totally cool throwing into my flex spot as like a top 45 wide receiver.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mentioned that Shaheed was my number 5. Zay Jones is right there as well. They were clear 5 and 6 for me. I ended up opting for Shaheed, which I'm thankful for, because now we have more variety on the show. Both of them are very, very good pickups this week. But transitioning off of him, we go on to my number 4 pickup, and that's going to be coming from the Baltimore Ravens. Pick your flavor is basically my advice here. It's the Ravens backfield. You prefer Justice Hill, maybe some more pass game utilization. You expect that upside there. Go pick up Justice Hill. You think Gus Edwards, like I do, is the more efficient running back, and get that between the tackles role. Go pick up Gus Edwards. Now, for me personally, like I said, I do prefer Gus Edwards. He's got the continuity with the team. We've seen him work into a workload in the past. He was way more efficient than Justice Hill in this game. But of course, again, this Ravens backfield, it's going to have value. We just got to take the right stab at it.
So these guys are way higher for me.
Wow.
I have these guys a lot higher, and specifically Edwards, because I think with Edwards, you're getting the way that I think NFL teams structure their backfields is the exact way that it's going to play out in Baltimore, where J.K. Dobbins was their lead back. He's their main ball carrier, and Justice Hill was probably always going to work in as a pass-catching back to take away from J.K. Dobbins. Now, unfortunately, J.K. Dobbins is now out for the season. So for me, I think that Gus Edwards, being the guy who's the early down banger archetype, is going to be the major beneficiary of J.K. Dobbins' injury, as much as Justice Hill got the goal line work. Honestly, I think it was more happenstance that happened. I don't think I expect that going forward. I don't think that Justice Hill is suddenly going to be the main early down ball carrier for this team. It's possible. I could absolutely be wrong about that. But I think Justice Hill has shown that all he can really be at this point in his career is a change of pace back. And with Gus Edwards, prior to his ACL tear, again, who's also 2 years removed from it, so he had that same kind of narrative for him that J.K. Dobbins had coming into the year. He's the guy that averaged 5 yards per carry anytime he touched the ball. So I actually think he's a very good option. And had this happened in the preseason, like I think we would have seen Gus Edwards probably go in like the 5th, 6th round of fantasy drafts, which is why I prefer Gus Edwards. And I think honestly, he might actually come at a discount because Justice Hill got the touchdowns and got the fantasy production.
Yeah, no, very good point. Where do you have this backfield ranked for reference? Number 1. Wow.
Okay. I have Gus Edwards as my number 1 ad this week. He's my number 1 ad this week.
And I'll quickly, rebuttal a little bit the reason why I don't have them higher than 4, simply because I do think the Ravens could be in the market for a vet running back, whether that's Leonard Fournette, whether that's Kareem Hunt, or, I mean, I talked about this to you off camera. What if they just go out there and make the swing for a guy like Jonathan Taylor? That's the pessimism I have towards ranking them higher, is that I do think that they could add a running back, but like you said, the upside for Gus Edwards, if they stick with this backfield, if it's just him and Justice Hill for the remaining 16 games of the season, is a legitimate running back too in fantasy. I do agree.
Yeah, so also like they elevated Melvin Gordon from the practice squad, so he's going to be involved. And I do think Kareem Hunt, Leonard Fournette, Jonathan Taylor, all possibilities. And for what it's worth, he's my number 1 ad this week. But I'm only spending like 20% of my fab on him. Yeah. I think it's a good waiver week for week 1, but there's no like drop your whole fab budget on them type of options. Sans maybe if AJ Dillon and Kenneth Gainwell and stuff are available, you could probably drop like 30 to 40% on those guys. I do think there's a lot of very solid 10 to 20% fab options this week, which is why I think it's a good waiver week. But there's nobody that I think is absolutely far and away an elite waiver wire ad. And like I said, I also think this week is potentially a trap for some of these guys. And Justice Hill would be one of the guys that I think is definitely a trap ad this week, especially if I can get Gus Edwards for 5 to 10, 15% of my budget, and Justice Hill goes for 30 to 40% in some leagues, like he's going to, potentially even more. I would say definitely steer clear of Justice Hill at that price tag. So my number 4 on this list is Kyren Williams of the Los Angeles Rams. So Kyren Williams had a monster actual stat line. You guys can see 53 snaps of the 81. By the way, 81 snaps is absolutely ridiculous that the Rams played on offense this past week. Ran 29 of the 33 running back routes, though, which is really encouraging. Cam Akers got 22 carries to his 15. But when you break it down further, John Daigle of 4for4 broke this down. Kyren Williams out-touched Cam Akers 14 to 11 until the Rams got ahead. So what we probably would have initially anticipated was that Cam Akers is the main running back and Kyren Williams got all of his touches in garbage time. That is not what happened. Cam Akers recorded 11 touches, all carries, to Kyren's 1 touch over the last 9 minutes of the fourth quarter to ice the game. So with Kyren Williams, you're getting the guy that ran most of the routes, and you're getting the guy that actually was playing when the game was close. And he has the better pass catching upside as well. So I'm not super high on Kyren Williams, the overall talent, because I mean, coming out of Notre Dame, he was good. He had good film, but he wasn't the most athletic guy in the world.
Running back.
Yeah. Slow, small running back. And I think he could be a fucking trap. Don't get me wrong. He could definitely be a trap this week, but I do think I'm willing to spend 5 to 15% of my fab budget on a guy that I think probably is a flex play going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. He's actually my number 3, so I may as well just transition right into that as well. The concern here is that, is this like the Rex Burkhead of last season, where he's got like the 3 down type of skill set, but he's not quite athletic, he's not quite big, might get replaced by the more talented back throughout the year. But I got to give him his credit, man. He absolutely completely made Cam Akers nearly redundant in this game. He had 22 carries at the end of the game, had 29 rushing yards when it comes to Cam Akers. And like you said, the majority of that came in garbage time. Now, do I think he's going to be that inefficient every week? No, but I also don't think that he's going to get 11 straight carries in garbage time every week. With Kyren Williams, you're getting a 3-down type of workload potentially. You're getting a player that was relatively efficient for the most part, at least in college on his profile, that we can potentially project moving forward. And maybe this Rams team isn't such a dumpster fire after all. We were talking about all offseason, like, hey, they're going to be missing Cobb. Stafford coming off of, the injuries he's faced the last couple of years. Maybe this team wins like 3, 4, 5 games. But no, they go out there, they lay the schmack down on a Seahawks team that everybody, I mean, was this not like the team that everybody, if they didn't have the Cowboys, the Niners, or the Eagles in the NFC Championship, they had the Seattle Seahawks. Everybody loved the Seahawks offense. Geno Smith, the pass weapons, everything about it. People were hyping up all offseason, and the Rams just kind of said, fuck all that. We're just going to beat them straight up. We beat them 24-13. Stafford looked fucking phenomenal, throwing to the wide receivers he had at his arsenal. And speaking of one of them, we will talk about in just a second. But shout out to this Rams offense. I think it could legitimately be a top 15 level unit as long as Matthew Stafford is there and Sean McVay is calling the shots. And I think this can straight transition to another part of this offense, because my number 2 pickup this week is Puka Nacua, wide receiver of the Los Angeles Rams. 10 catches, 119 yards on 15 targets against the Seahawks in his first career game. You guys see the splits there. Basically a 3-way committee, quote unquote, in terms of the usage. All of the top 3 Rams receivers running 35 of the 39 routes, making sense considering the fact that this is a predominant 11 personnel team. But This guy looked like Robert Woods. And I don't know if it was the number. I don't know if it was like, the way he ran his routes, but he looks like Robert Woods playing. He looks like that manufactured touch, get the ball in his hands type of guy that McVay has made bay with throughout his fucking career as a coach. I do think that if you pick up Puka Nacua right now, he may even have viability once Cooper Kupp comes back. Because I do think this team needs a role for a second target in this offense. Puka looked fucking dominant when the ball was in his hands. And like I said, we saw Robert Woods produce like a wide receiver 2 with Cooper Kupp on the field in the past. I do think that Puka Nacua can end up being this year's Robert Woods.
So, interesting fact about Puka Nacua. Last year in college football, there was a guy by the name of Marvin Harrison Jr. who had an 89.9 PFF receiving grade. Do you know there was only 4 receivers in the country that had a higher grade than Marvin Harrison? And one of them was Puka Nacua. So we're talking about a guy that, like, was he a good prospect? Probably not. He was a day 3 pick. He was a guy that went to BYU. He's a little older as a prospect as well. But he had a very efficient final season at BYU. And PFF loved him. They were all over him as like a good late round pick. So I do think, yeah, Puka Nacua is a guy that could stick around. It's worth noting that Van Jefferson saw shadow coverage from Tariq Woolen. And as I talked about, Van Jefferson's definitely not a good enough wide receiver to beat Tariq Woolen. And the play calling might have shifted towards more of a dink and dunk type of offense, more of a let's get the ball in Puka Nacua's hands. Also, Tutu Atwell, for what it's worth, had 8 targets in this game. Yeah. He's a decent pickup, but I probably wouldn't spend very much fab on him. Puka Nacua is actually my number 2 ad as well, because I think he is a really good option this week. I think 15% of your fab budget's very much capable, 15 to 25 if you're desperate for wide receiver talent, because this is a guy that you could probably plug right into your flex spot or right into your wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 kind of area of the rankings as well.
Well, I'll just say right now, I'm going to be doing the wide receiver rankings for next week, and knowing the fact that Cooper Kupp is out and knowing the fact that he commanded this type of volume in his first career game, like, this guy's going to be a fringe top 30 overall wide receiver for me. And the fact that you're going to be able to get that on the waiver wire, especially in your deep leagues, PPR leagues, that can get that level of upside that he showed from a young player already, sign me up.
Yeah, I'm a tad more hesitant. I don't know if I'm going to rank him that aggressively this week, but I will say, if he does it again, like, and he's out there running the routes and getting, another big target share, you just don't see rookie wide receivers do that in their first game. Like, 15 targets in your first game, insane. That's crazy. Yeah, I don't care who your quarterback is or how many times your Matthew Stafford dropped back to pass, because it was a lot in this game. But I will say, like, that is impressive no matter how you slice it.
So quick note. So PFF has 37 recorded targets there. So if you're doing the math there, and he had 15 targets, he had a 41% target share in his first career game. And I see Brock says that we're not reading comments, but he's back and he looks like a top 10 quarterback again. I agree. If Stafford looks like this on a week-to-week basis, I have no problem putting him back into the top 10 level sphere. And every single one of his weapons is going to get a significant bump if that happens.
Yeah, and once comes back, like you said, that only relieves more pressure off of Puka Nacua. It'll probably hurt his target share because Cooper Kupp is so good. But at the same time, you're talking about a guy that's going to improve the offense tenfold once Cooper Kupp is back there. And it's a guy that you're not worried about Puka Nacua if Cooper Kupp is out there. So he's a guy that definitely could benefit from Kupp coming back from like an efficiency standpoint, big play standpoint. So have we covered all of your 5, or are we still missing your one, right? Okay, so my number 3, and this might be number 1. I'm not sure if he is or not. My number 3 is Roschon Johnson. And the reason I have Roschon Johnson this high is because I'm not like just box score looking at the fact that he had 7 targets and the fact that, he had a number of good carries, because a lot of people, I'm sure, are going to point to this, which is tweeted out from a good friend of ours, Hayden Winks. The early down and the early in the half usage was favoring Khalil Herbert and Deontay Foreman. And Roschon Johnson wasn't really involved until mainly the 3rd and 4th quarter, when the game started to get out of hand. Of course, Aaron Jones mentioned he didn't come back into the game because he was injured and the game was already over at that point in time. So Roschon Johnson at face value, doesn't look like the greatest ad, but I will say I want to get ahead of the curve on Roschon Johnson, who right now is only rostered in 22% of leagues, because he's not going to come at a huge cost. And the bottom line is, this is a rookie, right? This is a rookie running back who's a 4th round pick, who's not a high draft pick. And he looked outstanding in this game. He had a near sidestep, toe tap, along the sidelines touchdown. And nobody in this backfield I'm really scared of. Khalil Herbert's a good player. Deontay Foreman's a good player. And even though Roschon Johnson's usage wasn't great prior to the game getting out of hand, him playing well means that he'll probably get used more.
Yeah, no, I love the take. If you need some upside, maybe you started out 1-0, you got a good projected team, and you want to add some upside to your bench. Really like Roshan Johnson. Now, unfortunately, he did not crack my top 5, and the one that did crack my number 1 overall didn't crack your top 5, which I'm pretty shocked at, because Josh Kelly, man, he looks like he's in that Ezekiel Elliott role over there with Los Angeles. Basically, a 50-50 split between him and Austin Eckler in week 1. 17 routes to Eckler's 24, 38 snaps to Eckler's 41. And as you can see, in terms of the touch distribution, 21 total opportunities for Eckler, 17 for Josh Kelly. Now, am I just saying on a week-to-week basis that Josh Kelly is clear and cut going to be this top 20 running back? Absolutely not. I don't think this is going to happen on a week-to-week basis. However, I do think, especially in good matchups for him, he can have this type of utilization, goal line type of opportunity, look very efficient, look like the best we've ever seen Josh Kelly look. The reason why I want to get him ahead of the curve right now is the fact that I fully believe in this Chargers offense. And I do think that given the depth after Austin Eckler, if anything were to happen to Austin Eckler, we could be looking at this stud, 20 touch per game type of running back on what should be a top 5 overall scoring offense with the Chargers. Now, could be a flash in the pan. Josh Kelly has kind of, not been the most efficient back in years past, and I understand it, but given the offensive line improvements, given the coaching improvements with Kellen Moore coming in, I'm more willing to buy in on it now. And I do think that given the cost of some of the other guys you'll see on the wire, you could sneak in Josh Kelly for maybe 8 to 10% of your fab, because he didn't have, the biggest of blow up weeks in week 1. But I do think given the usage, given the implied upside there, if Eckler were to miss time, I want him. I want pieces of him.
Yeah, he's definitely not my number 1 ad. That's a little crazy in my opinion.
Hot take.
He almost made my list. I won't lie. Like, there's him, and then the last guy that I can talk about here in a second. I do think Kelly seems a little trappy. I'm not going to lie. I think people are going to chase after him because he plays for the Chargers and he has the implied. Like, I don't think anything that you're saying is things that people and even average casual fantasy players don't know. So that's why I'm a little nervous about Josh Kelly. I would be willing to spend 0 to 5% or 0 to 10% of my budget on him, but I'm probably not breaking the bank too much.
Yeah, no, definitely fair. He definitely has the trap stigma on him. I know you're going to throw out like Rex Burkhead from last year. I understand that. But at the same time, it's like, I know how Kellen Moore operates, and having that big grinder between the tackles is usually part of his game plan. And if Josh Kelly's going to be that guy, if Isaiah Spiller is basically useless, didn't get a single snap, did he even suit up? Was he a healthy scratch?
He's not a factor unless Eckler or Kelly gets hurt. He's not a factor probably.
Because, this backfield, he literally had nearly a 50% snap share between him and Eckler. So, obviously, you're not going to rank him ahead of Eckler. But I do think, given the circumstance, given the matchup, you can rank him as a top 25 level running back and feel fine with it.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's definitely, he applies to me. I think he's more of a stash than he is somebody that I would want if I'm down at running back. Like, I don't think you're going to feel good about putting Josh Kelly in your lineup every week. I would say I would prefer even Roshan Johnson. I would prefer, obviously Gainwell and Algier if they're available. Yeah. I would prefer, some of the other guys that we talked about in this video today. Kyron Williams comes to mind there. The guy that just missed my list is Kendrick Bourne. Who for the Patriots, he had 2 touchdowns, 11 targets. I don't think this was just a product of Devontae Parker being out, because we saw in the preseason that it was Devontae Parker, Kendrick Bourne, and Juju Smith-Schuster in 3 wide receiver sets. Devontae Parker is out. Kayshon Boutte slides in. So I think he's the guy that gets, taken off the field when Parker comes back. With Kendrick Bourne, I believe wholeheartly he's the best receiver on this team.
Agreed.
And Mac Jones looked a lot better. He was the quarterback 2 on the week. And the whole...
It's the Eagles.
Yeah, literally. The whole scheme looked way better than the Matt Patricia, Mac Jones experience. And also, more importantly, the reason Kendrick Bourne was on the field last year was Matt Patricia also. We know that, he holds vendettas against players and that kind of shit. I've heard, Greg Rosenthal of Around the NFL and a number of Patriots insiders say you didn't play your best receiver last year. Kendrick Bourne was the best receiver on this team last year, and that includes Jacoby Myers. So Kendrick Bourne, for me, I think if you're in need of wide receiver depth, or if you need a guy to throw into your lineup right away, if you're waiting on Cooper Kupp, or if you're waiting on maybe Jerry Jeudy or Christian Watson or somebody that's out with an injury right now, Kendrick Bourne is the guy that I'm going after, along with Zay Jones, who I talked about earlier, as guys that I think you can legitimately take off the waiver wire and plug into your flex spot.
Yeah, no, I agree. Quick note, by the way, 494 of you guys watching right now. Appreciate the support, man. It means a lot. I do see, though, 125 likes. There's 494 of you. If you guys enjoyed the stream, you enjoyed the organization, talking some waivers, talking some takeaways, hit that like button. Let's try to see next time I look at 175, 200 likes.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple guys, let's just rattle off real quick at the end of the waivers, and then we'll maybe scan the chat, see if there's any like recurring questions that we can kind of address from a waiver standpoint, and then get to any supers that we have here. A couple guys that just missed the cut for me were Tajay Spears, who actually outsnapped Derrick Henry. I don't think he's the guy that I'm like overly expecting that from going forward, but he's definitely a stash. If you guys have an open bench spot, you were holding some backup tight end or backup quarterback, I think definitely Tajay Spears needs to be rostered as well. I saw a stat I've seen a million people repeat it at this point. Rashad White averaged like, I think it was like minus 37 yards over expectation in the game against the Vikings. So Sean Tucker actually got on the field, actually was the number 2 back right away, and Rashad White can't carry the ball. He's just not a good runner of the ball. Like I've been watching this guy now as a fan of the Buccaneers. He's just not a good early down running back, and Sean Tucker could definitely work into that role. So if you have an open spot on your bench, Sean Tucker's a decent option. Did anybody else stick out to you as somebody that we missed? Tutu Atwell, I already kind of made a reference to as well, had a decent role, but anybody else?
Nothing in particular. I think you pretty much covered the majority of it. I would say for reference, like if Rico Dowdle was available and you want a deep stash, it looked like he was a clear running back too. Obviously, the Cowboys got ahead pretty quickly, but especially in the early portion of the game when Tony Pollard was subbed out, Rico Dowdle was handling the early down carries. Rico Dowdle was getting some third down work. Rico Dowdle looked like he's well ahead of Deuce on the depth chart as of now. Deuce only really got into the game in the fourth quarter. So I do think if you're in a deeper league, maybe you have, 6 or 7 bench spots, deeper starting lineup, and you could stash Rico Dowdle. Like if anything happened to Tony Pollard, I do think he would be the main RB1.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, too, we didn't talk about any quarterbacks or tight ends, but Chigakonkwo ran like 94% of the routes or something for the Titans. So he's definitely the number 1 tight end pickup for me.
Brock
I know
Purdy.
Hunter Henry had the big game, but I actually prefer Chigakonkwo at his price tag. But I think Hunter Henry is also a decent bet as well. As far as the quarterback position, I'm not chasing the Jordan Love performance against the Bears. No. I am chasing the Brock Purdy performance, though, if he is available in your league and you guys need a quarterback. Maybe, I don't know if you're waiting on Kyler Murray or something like that, or if you just have a quarterback that's not very good, like maybe you drafted Geno Smith or something. Like I would 100% go after Brock Purdy if you need a quarterback.
Quick note, by the way, I know this is not Brock Purdy, but former San Francisco quarterback, got to give him some credit. Big shout out to Jimmy Garoppolo. Looked pretty good, pretty functional. If you have Raiders players right now, we were kind of talking about like, oh, this might be just a wasteland because Jimmy Garoppolo is going to hold the players down. But Jacoby Myers, huge game. Devontae Adams didn't have the biggest of games, but of course, Pat Surtain was lined up across.
Yeah, he's going to be in the buy lows video. You can bet on that.
Josh Jacobs, huge workload again. Like if this Raiders team can threaten for 7, 8, maybe even 9 wins potentially for a playoff spot, I do think that all those Raiders players see a significant stock up because, Jimmy Garoppolo just looked good. I think he was like number 3 overall this week in terms of EPA, according to PFF. Or not PFF, but according to, I think it was Kevin Cole who tweeted it. He was number 3 in EPA across all the board for quarterbacks. So.
Yeah, for sure. So let's get to some of the super chats. And then I scanned the chat there. So I figured out kind of like recurring things. A lot of people want us to talk about fab spend. So we can kind of go over that at the end as well. Kennifer in here says 8-man PPR, have Lawrence and Watson, drop Deshaun Watson for AR. For starters, I would say in an 8-man league, you shouldn't be rostering 2 quarterbacks to begin with because the waivers have plenty of options on your thing. So what I would probably be doing is like, if there's somebody like Zay Flowers available or something like that, I would just drop Deshaun Watson for Zay Flowers.
Or maybe you can see if Lawrence plus Watson can get you a quarterback that really underperformed in week 1.
Like Jalen Hurts?
Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, somebody like that.
Yeah. I would say at face value, though, do not drop Deshaun Watson for Anthony Richardson. As much as he's a good option, I probably would just rather roll Lawrence and Watson. If you're dead committed to having 2 quarterbacks, I would rather have Lawrence and Watson. Joshua says dropping Swift and or Akers to grab waiver wire running back ? So of the guys available this week, is there anybody that you would drop Swift or Akers for?
Probably not.
Gainwell is probably the only one.
Oh, right. Yeah. If Gainwell's available.
But like the guys that we talked about, like Gus Edwards and Kyron Williams and stuff like that, I'm probably going to hold Swift and Akers for 1 more week. If you absolutely need to start somebody, I think you could maybe drop. I don't think I want to do it, to be honest. I would drop a wide receiver or something that's on your bench, or a second tight end or a second quarterback in favor of Gus Edwards if he was available. But for the most part, I'm probably just going to hold Swift and Akers and see what happens there, unless I'm desperate.
Yeah. I agree there.
Okay. And then as far as like the rest of the chat, we're not going to get to everybody's questions, unfortunately. Again, we'll be live later tonight before Monday Night Football. So if you have more detailed questions, we will get involved in those. A lot of people are saying like, how much would you spend on Nakua? How much would you spend on Bourne? So as far as like my fab spend for all of my top 5, I'll go over my top 5 and then my honorable mentions, and then you can go over yours, but just the fab spend portion. So for me on Gus Edwards, I would be willing to spend 20 to 25% at absolute most. If you had Dobbins, or if you have a lot of running backs available, or not a lot of running backs available to play, I would be willing to spend 15 to 25%, somewhere in that range. Puka Nakua, I think I'm probably 10 to 20% on him. And then Roshan Johnson, probably about 10 to 20% as well, maybe even a little bit less. I think you could get him for less than that. And then Kyron Williams, probably at most 5 to 10%. Same goes for Zay Jones. I'm probably 5 to 10% on him as well. And then Kendrick Bourne, about 5 to 10%. So anybody else that you would that you disagree with there? Would you spend a little bit more on any of those guys?
Yeah, so I'll go through mine real quick. So in terms of 5 to 1, Rashid Shaheed, you should probably be able to get for like 8 to 10%. I think that's reasonable. He kind of might slip under the waiver wire. I mean, for what it's worth, he did have a very good game. So maybe the casuals might just scoop him up and bid like 30%. But if you can get him for like, even you want to risk it, go like 12%, I'd be cool with that. Justice Hill, Gus Edwards, same type of shit. For me, it would be Gus Edwards, but I'm assuming somebody's going to spend more on Justice Hill, hence why he's here. But for me, Gus Edwards, if you can get him in the 10 to 15%, I'd feel comfortable. Now, that might not be able to get him, but I do still have concerns that they bring in another vet or they trade for Jonathan Taylor. I understand, Melvin Gordon was activated, but it's a week-to-week game. Like, what if, something happens to Justice Hill, he gets banged up next week and they want to go out and make a big splash? I think that's still in the range of outcomes for the Ravens, hence why I would limit my spending there. In terms of number 3, Kyron Williams, I do think like 15 to 20% should be able to get it done. You need some upside.
You'd be willing to put that much up on Kyron, eh?
Yeah, well, I mean, I just mentioned that Gus would be like 12 to 15. So I do think that Kyron, if you can get him for closer to the 15 mark, don't want to go to 20, but if you have to go to 20 and you need running back, maybe you drafted a hero running back build, you have Bijan and like your other running backs were like Gibson, Charbonnet, etc., and you want to get somebody for some standalone production right now, I would go with Kyron Williams around that price. Puka Nakua, I'd be willing to spend up to 20, 25%. Like, I think he's going to be a player that we can look on for the rest of the season. And technically speaking, Kelly is my one, so I would be willing to spend 20 to 25% personally. But I do think you should be able to get him for cheaper. I do think you can get him for 10 to 15%. Didn't have the biggest of stat lines, and I do think the guys like think of like the top scorers, like Kendrick Bourne's going to go for a lot just because he had a high score. Guys like that are just going to go for a lot because he had a high score.
Yeah, so for the most part, I think I'm going to go for some of the more underrated fab spends this week and let my league mates overspend on Justice Hill and Kyron Williams and those type of guys. I'll probably go after, Zay Jones and Gus Edwards and Kendrick Bourne and potentially Chigakonkwo if I need a tight end, or potentially Brock Purdy if I need a quarterback, something like that. Bernard actually super stickered twice, so I definitely want to get to his question here. He said, Dobbins was my RB2. Who should I pick up on the waivers? I have Elijah Mitchell and Jalen Warren on my bench. So
this is an example of a Kyron team. If you need production right now, those guys obviously with the more upside. If you need Kyron to fill in as your running back too, for now, I do think Kyron Williams would be literally the perfect fit.
Yeah, I also think the easy transition is just to take his backup too and take Gus Edwards if he's available. So I'd be willing to spend between 15 and 25% on either of those two running backs, especially probably you need the running back production, especially Jalen Warren and Elijah Mitchell are great stashes, but they're not really the type of guys that you can just throw into your lineup.
Agreed.
So I think Kyron and Gus Edwards would be good pickups there. So Kevin's question here, this will probably be the last one we get to. Again, if you have more questions, we will be live later tonight to answer some of those. Kevin says trade, giving Chase, getting Jacobs and Higgins.
No.
Yeah, I would trade Chase for this, to be honest. I think this is a great move.
I don't like it.
He says roster look, Breece Hall, J.K. Dobbins, like he's going to be down bad at running back and just overall with those two guys being like slow starts / Dobbins being over the year.
This is just selling low on Chase though, I think.
He also has Watson too, man. Like he needs wins. Like that's the reason I'm leaning toward. Like I think at face value, you're probably right, but
I need a bigger needle mover.
Higgins, man. You're talking about like a low end wide receiver 1, high end wide receiver 2, and a low end RB1 that you're getting for Chase. He's great, obviously, but I don't know, man. The depth might be appealing for his situation.
I don't want to tear down that far from Chase. That's the problem, man. Like if it was like a Tony Pollard running back or like a Saquon Barkley or Nick Chubb, at that point it's like, okay, at least I'm getting a running back 1 back. Like I think Jacobs is probably like close to that, but he's more so like a low end 1, high end RB2. And for me personally, like I can't give up a high end wide receiver 1 for that. So I would personally just hold.
I personally I would do it. I think Higgins
Yeah,
and Jacobs are good options there. I think Jacobs is closer to Pollard and Barkley than you're giving him credit for. And I also think
he's good.
Higgins is not just a throw into that deal. Like he's a very solid option, especially for a
Very, but
team that probably needs wins with Breece Hall, with J.K. Dobbins, with Christian Watson.
now if this you already have Ridley on your roster, but if this was Calvin Ridley, I would do it. But the
Yeah,
thing with
that's fair. I think if you wanted
yeah,
the upside, I understand as well. So again, if we didn't get to your questions, we will be live later tonight. Turn on the notifications for that. Last question that we're going to get to, and then we will popping out of here. He says, "Are we selling high on Ayuk?" I mean, it all depends what that means in your league. If you can get would you sell Brandon Ayuk for T Higgins 1-for-1 right now?
T Higgins for Ayuk, I
Would you
would
do it?
I would lean Higgins, but it's closer than I would think. Yeah,
Yeah, like it, it,
I
it
think
really all
Ayuk might
depends
be a
what
3-4 turn guy
like I
right
said with
now.
the 49ers, the Eagles, the Bengals, the Cowboys, like these Ayuk's going to have games like this, and it's
Yeah,
probably going to keep happening. But do I think Ayuk is going to blow his ADP out of the water and be a top 5 receiver, like
no,
where his price tag might be close to if your league is very reactive? No. So if you can get T. Higgins or Jalen Waddle or I'm trying to think, Devontae Adams, like somebody, if Garrett Wilson has a down game, you can go from Ayuk to Wilson with like a minimal piece involved. Then yeah, I would sell high
CD.
on him. But I think that Ayuk might be a top 15 receiver, a top 20 receiver this year. So I also don't want to just sell him just because he had a good game, because I
I
do
agree.
really believe in him for the course of the season.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, for what it's worth, if I had to like rank where he would go in terms of ADP right now, if we had, the week 1 projection included, like where Debo was going at the 3-4 turn, you may as well just swap him and Ayuk, because I do think that Ayuk, the way he was able to show that on display, dominate all 3 levels of the field, obviously the 2 touchdown catches, and Brock Purdy, for what it's worth, has more of a touchdown passing upside than we ever saw with Jimmy Garoppolo in the fold.
Yeah, absolutely. Dude, Brock Purdy's like an automatic 250 yards, 2 touchdowns every game, it
Yeah,
seems like. So, definitely a guy that I'm curious to see what your market think. Like I have Ayuk in my home league, so I will
yeah,
report back to you guys what my home league
yeah,
thinks of Brandon Ayuk, because I'm gonna be going after Devontae Adams and T Higgins and using Ayuk plus to try and get to like St. Brown or something, like if I can.
yeah.
Probably won't be able to do it because my league mates are generally smarter than that and they know what I'm doing when I'm trying to do that. But I will say, if you guys are in more reactive, like home league casual leagues, you could probably get away with some stuff like that. So definitely appreciate you guys for joining us. Again, looks
Yep.
like this was a smashing
Hey,
success so far. A lot of you guys in here, 3, 4, 500 people at some points, hit the like button, which is I'm sure what Danny's about to say right now.
172 likes. We're 28 off of 200. 200 likes, guys. You can help us get into. And for the record, like 200 is a lot, but there's 464 of you in here, meaning that even if we get to 200 likes, 264 of you are just basically saying like, yeah, fuck you guys. Like, I don't have to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, if you're new around here, hit the subscribe button as well. Definitely check out all of our show sponsors. We have a boosted pick'em special tonight, again on Underdog Fantasy. Aaron Rodgers, I believe, is like half a passing yard or whatever. So if you want to play some Underdog Fantasy, of course, definitely go check that out. Promo code FSE will get you 100% back, up to $100, and you'll also get our weekly rankings, our weekly matchup charts, all that good stuff for free for using our promo code over on Underdog Fantasy. And definitely check out our site, flockfantasy.com, as well, which you can get all of our weekly rankings and all that good stuff. We'll be having a ton of Dynasty content coming to the site throughout this college football season. We will not forget about you folks who are Dynasty players
Oh,
during
yeah.
the college football season, like some channels do. So definitely hit us up if you guys have any other questions. Bernard basically just said, can I send you a DM? Absolutely.
Yeah,
You
DM
guys
us.
want
Yeah,
to send us, you didn't answer your question, send
feel
us a
free.
DM on Twitter, send us a DM on Discord. If you
Yep.
guys are, Flock site subscribers, definitely save those questions for the Patreon or for the private live stream as well. But with that being said, peace out. We'll talk to you soon.